The House chamber pulsed with tension as Speaker Mike Johnson stood at the podium, his gavel resting beside him. Cameras focused on his stern face as he addressed Representative Jasmine Crockett's proposed police accountability amendment to the latest criminal justice bill. "The gentlewoman from Texas," Johnson began, his voice echoing across the chamber, "has submitted an amendment that demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of law enforcement realities. Perhaps if she had more experience beyond her brief tenure in Congress, she would recognize the dangerous implications of her proposal." The chamber erupted, Republicans applauding, Democrats protesting. Johnson raised his voice above the noise. "The chair will not recognize this amendment for consideration, as it fails to meet basic standards of legislative coherence." All eyes turned toward Crockett, seated upright in her navy blazer. She remained calm despite the public slight. As Johnson moved to the next order of business, she rose, steady and deliberate. "Point of personal privilege, Mr. Speaker," she called, her voice clear and unwavering. Johnson paused, irritation flickering across his face. With visible reluctance, he nodded. The chair recognizes a gentlewoman from Texas for a point of personal privilege. Crockett adjusted the microphone. Those who knew her recognized the look in her eyes. Not anger, but determination. A former civil rights attorney, she had faced tougher adversaries than Mike Johnson. No one in that chamber, least of all the speaker, realized they were about to witness a turning point. Johnson, 51, had risen to the speakership through strategy and party turmoil. A constitutional lawyer and evangelical conservative, he prided himself on his mastery of House procedure and his combative stance toward Democrats. Since taking the gavel 9 months earlier, he had frequently used procedural power to silence opponents, particularly those he viewed as politically vulnerable. His dismissal of Crockett's amendment was calculated, an effort to humiliate a rising Democratic voice while consolidating support from his base. But Crockett was not easily silenced. At 42, the freshman congresswoman from Texas had built her career defending victims of police misconduct. Her amendment, calling for independent review boards for police departments receiving federal funds, was born from years in courtrooms where she'd fought for accountability and justice. To Johnson, rejecting her was a show of dominance. To Crockett, it was a test, whether a first-term lawmaker could stand up to the most powerful Republican in Congress and still be heard. Behind closed doors, Johnson's staff had planned the spectacle. "Make an example of her," he reportedly instructed. "Show them what happens when they push this police reform narrative." But Crockett had spent her career being underestimated. She had learned to anticipate disrespect and use it to her advantage. Standing firm, she began, "Mr. Speaker, I rise not only to address your rejection of my amendment, but also the troubling pattern it represents." Johnson straightened, expecting a brief procedural note. Instead, Crockett continued, "When you suggest that I lack experience to propose police accountability measures, I wonder if you know that I have litigated 67 police misconduct cases in federal court." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Johnson tapped his gavel. "The gentlewoman will confine her remarks." "I am addressing the personal attack on my qualifications, Mr. Speaker," Crockett said sharply. "When you question a member's competence, it becomes part of the record, and that record must reflect the truth." Then, lifting a document on Johnson's own letterhead, she concluded, 3 years ago, before becoming Speaker, you co-sponsored legislation nearly identical to my amendment. The only difference is, this time, it came from me." The chamber fell silent. The chamber fell silent as Representative Jasmine Crockett lifted a document. "I have here," she said evenly, "the committee testimony in which then Representative Mike Johnson stated, and I quote, 'Independent review mechanisms are essential for maintaining public trust in law enforcement.'" End quote. A murmur rippled through the House. Speaker Johnson's expression darkened as he realized the direction her remarks were heading. Leaning toward the parliamentarian, he whispered briefly, then spoke into the microphone. "The gentlewoman's point of personal privilege is to address personal attacks, not to debate policy. The chair directs the gentlewoman to conclude her remarks." The attempt to silence her only deepened the tension. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez shook her head in disbelief, while several moderate Republicans exchanged uneasy glances. sensing that the speaker might have gone too far. Crockett nodded calmly. "I appreciate the speaker's guidance to address the personal attack directly," she said. "When you question my experience and understanding of law enforcement, you ignore the fact that I have spent my career working on these issues. The selective dismissal of expertise, when it comes from certain members, raises questions about equitable treatment in this chamber." The silence stretched. When the speaker claims my amendment fails to meet basic legislative standards, yet it mirrors provisions he himself once supported, it suggests that the standard being applied depends not on the content, but on the identity of the legislator. The implication that Johnson's ruling was biased rather than procedural sent a visible jolt through the room. Several Democrats rose in solidarity, while Republican leaders gathered nervously near the podium. Johnson tried to reassert control. "The chair has heard the gentlewoman's point of privilege. The ruling on the amendment stands. We will now proceed." "Mr. Speaker, I have not yielded the floor," Crockett interjected firmly. "My point of privilege has not been addressed." Her mastery of procedure, the very tool Johnson used to dominate opponents, momentarily froze him. The cameras caught a flicker of hesitation as he weighed the optics of silencing her versus appearing unjust. Finally, he relented. 1 minute to conclude. "Thank you, Mr. Speaker," she replied. "This chamber deserves consistency in how amendments are evaluated and how members are treated. I have submitted for the record the Speaker's prior statements, supporting provisions nearly identical to those in my amendment, along with a legal analysis confirming its compliance with House rules. I respectfully request that my amendment be debated on its merits, not dismissed through mischaracterization of its sponsor." Her response, precise and principled, shifted the chamber's mood. Members from both parties nodded subtly in agreement with her call for fairness. Johnson now faced a dilemma: uphold his rejection and appear arbitrary, or reverse himself and risk humiliation. After a brief consultation, he stood. "The chair will take the gentlewoman's request under advisement. The House will stand in recess for 15 minutes. The unexpected break sent the floor buzzing. C-SPAN cameras showed Johnson huddled with his leadership team, while Crockett was approached by members from both sides. Representative Jamie Raskin praised her poise, while Republican Nancy May stopped by to remark quietly. He walked right into that one. When the House reconvened, Johnson's composure had faded. After further review and consultation with the parliamentarian, he began tightly. "The chair has determined that the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Texas is in order and will be considered by the House." A ripple of surprise swept the chamber. Johnson had backed down. Without admitting error, he claimed, the chair's initial assessment was based on technical considerations, which have now been addressed. But everyone in the room understood the truth. Crockett had won. She did not gloat. Instead, she nodded, eyes steady on her notes. Her focus had already shifted from procedural victory to the fight for justice that had brought her to the floor in the first place. Representative Jasmine Crockett began with quiet authority. "This amendment establishes balanced accountability measures for police departments receiving federal funds," she said, "by creating review mechanisms that protect both the public and officers through transparent, impartial investigations of misconduct allegations." Her tone was steady, her phrasing deliberate. She explained that the proposed review boards will include both community representatives and law enforcement officials, ensuring fairness for all parties. But it was her next words, drawn from personal experience, that silenced the chamber. "In my practice," she said, "I represented a 19-year-old man with no criminal record who spent 14 months in jail because evidence of officer misconduct was concealed from his defense. When that evidence surfaced, all charges were dismissed. An independent review board would have uncovered it much earlier, saving both that young man's freedom and taxpayer resources." Her testimony, rooted in lived experience rather than abstract theory, resonated across party lines. Even some Republicans who had initially supported Speaker Johnson's dismissal of the amendment now listened with unexpected attentiveness. The shift became unmistakable when Representative Matt Gaetz, known for his combative conservatism, took the floor. "While I have reservations about certain aspects of this amendment," he began, "Representative Crockett has raised legitimate concerns that deserve serious consideration. I would suggest a modification to strengthen due process protections for officers, but the core accountability framework appears sound. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Crockett's measured presentation had transformed confrontation into conversation. What had begun as a procedural standoff was now an authentic policy debate. For nearly 2 hours, lawmakers from both parties spoke, not in slogans but in substance. Throughout the exchange, Speaker Mike Johnson sat silently at the podium, the man who had tried to suppress discussion, now presiding over one of the most thoughtful debates of his tenure. Then came the turning point. Representative Jim Jordan, Johnson's close ally and Judiciary Committee chair, stepped to the microphone. Many expected him to defend the speaker. Instead, he proposed a compromise. I move that Representative Crockett amendment be modified to include a 6-month implementation study before the review boards become fully operational. The chamber froze. It was a face-saving offer. Republicans could claim oversight, while Crockett's framework remained intact. When she rose and accepted the modification, the room broke into rare bipartisan applause. The final vote was 287 to 142, with 63 Republicans joining all Democrats in support. The result marked a remarkable victory, not only for Crockett personally, but for police accountability reform in a deeply divided Congress. As the tally was read, cameras caught Johnson motionless, expression unreadable. What he had meant as a demonstration of power had become a showcase of Crockett's discipline, intellect, and command of process. She offered no gloating, no victory speech, only gratitude and focus on policy. When the session adjourned, members from both sides approached her to congratulate her. Liz Cheney was overheard telling Crockett, "That's how this place is supposed to work. You turn conflict into legislation." Meanwhile, Johnson quietly exited through a side door, avoiding reporters. By the next morning, clips of the exchange had gone viral. Analysts across the political spectrum praised Crockett's composure and Johnson's miscalculation. Even conservative commentator Scott Jennings admitted, the speaker broke one of the oldest rules in politics: never underestimate your opponent. On MSNBC's Morning Joe, Crockett stayed focused on substance. This wasn't about personalities, she said. It was about fairness, consistency, and accountability. Yesterday proved that when we focus on policy, not ego, we can still find common ground. Her calm professionalism cemented her reputation as one of Congress's most capable new leaders, turning a public rebuke into a defining moment of integrity and reform. The Washington Post later wrote, "In an era dominated by performative politics, Representative Jasmine Crockett's focus on genuine policy results over partisan spectacle is a refreshing commitment to true governance." The political fallout for Speaker Mike Johnson was swift. Reports from closed-door Republican meetings revealed rare dissent, with veteran lawmaker Tom Cole warning, "We make ourselves look foolish when we dismiss members based on false assumptions." Johnson's authority, once unquestioned, began to erode. After his public reversal following Crockett's challenge, lawmakers from both parties began citing the so-called Crockett precedent, openly questioning his rulings and demanding fairer debate. Meanwhile, Crockett's influence surged. Within 72 hours, her office received over 12,000 messages and $1.8 million in donations, remarkable for a non-competitive district. National media outlets requested interviews. But instead of basking in newfound fame, she used her platform to advance 2 new criminal justice reform bills. Her credibility opened doors with key committee chairs who had once overlooked her proposals. The bipartisan success of her amendment gave moderate Republicans cover to support similar measures. Within 3 months, 2 more accountability bills passed, marking the most significant police reform progress in years. Johnson's standing, however, continued to weaken. Committee chairs began advancing bipartisan bills without his approval. During one tense Rules Committee meeting, even Tom Cole broke ranks. We learned from the Crockett Amendment that it serves us better to consider legislation on its merits. 6 months later, President Biden signed the Comprehensive Criminal Justice Reform Act, 3 of whose provisions originated from Crockett's legislation. She turned conflict into meaningful reform, the president remarked. 2 years on, as Johnson faced a leadership challenge, analysts still cited the Crockett incident as a defining blow to his authority. Crockett's calm defiance had become a model, what Brookings later termed the Crockett Method. Combining expertise, procedural skill, and focus on substance over spectacle. Her story proved a timeless truth. Real power lies not in domination, but in disciplined integrity.